Addressing climate change is going to require a number of actions, the most obvious being that we need to stop burning fossil fuels. This graph puts the challenge into perspective. The overall demand for energy continues to climb, primarily because of a growing middle class, basically people wanting the same lifestyle that many of us take for granted. It seems unlikely that conservation alone is going to solve this problem. This section represents fossil fuels, this section nuclear, and this renewables. We need to somehow replace all of this with some combination of these. The U.S. picture looks somewhat better at about 20% renewables and 20% nuclear, but with climate change, it's the global picture that matters. We'll need to not only stop burning fossil fuels ourselves, but help the rest of the world do likewise. To truly confront climate change will require us to share our solutions with the world. Most of the attention is on renewables as the solution, but that's not a given. Renewables are dependent on the weather and the time of day. Renewables currently work because other energy sources are used to fill in the downtime, meaning we also need to develop ways of storing energy if renewables are the solution. Nuclear power doesn't have that issue, instead producing power on demand, independent of external factors. On top of that, the newer reactor designs called SMR, or Small Modular Reactor, promise to be both safer and easier to implement. Both of those will be easy metrics to verify. And while storing the byproducts of nuclear energy involves risk, that risk pales in comparison to what we face with climate change. The larger point here is not that nuclear is a solution, rather that it's premature to be taking options off the table, at least not until we have a clear path to our end goal. And these alternatives, all of them, renewables and nuclear, need to have far more effort and urgency applied to them than we are currently. This needs to be the equivalent of a wartime effort. This is our generation's Manhattan Project, or moonshot. Time is not on our side. We also need to transition our homes away from fossil fuels, an effort that's not happening fast enough. Right now, when the consumer goes to buy a hot water heater, for example, they often have little choice but to buy a gas appliance. That's because it costs too much to heat with electricity. While the price of electricity is expected to drop significantly as newer technologies come online, we can't wait. We need this transition to happen in parallel, not sequentially. We need to both eliminate fossil fuel subsidies and create new subsidies for electricity usage. We need to make doing the right thing affordable. This higher electricity demand will invariably require improvements to our power grid, but so be it. All of these changes need to be happening now, not later. Transportation accounts for a significant portion of our greenhouse gases. We've begun the transition towards electric vehicles, but it's not happening fast enough. We need to subsidize both the electric vehicles, the charging stations, and the electricity they use. We should not be adding new gas-powered vehicles to the road. And there's actually a second revolution underway in transportation, also important to the environment, and that's the transition to fully autonomous control. Autonomous vehicles will greatly increase efficiency, allowing the vehicles to interact with one another in ways that human drivers cannot. And rather than private ownership, autonomous vehicles can be a shared resource, reducing the total number of vehicles in the system. Finally, autonomous control will save thousands of lives. Car accidents will no longer be a leading cause of death. Autonomous control needs to be a national priority as well, not just a transition to electric vehicles. And when we're finally carbon neutral, then what? Are we done? No, we're still responsible for all the carbon we've already put into the atmosphere. As you can see from this graph, we clearly had a head start on the rest of the world. We still own this carbon. We're still responsible for it. New technologies might eventually allow us to extract carbon directly from the air, but there are many ways of addressing our climate debt. We can plant trees, we can deploy new farming methods, we can artificially seed the atmosphere with particles to counter the influence of CO2. Did you know that the total revenue Brazil generates from rainforest destruction is less than the U.S. government spends in a single day? Perhaps we could lease rainforest lands to preserve them. Whether these specific ideas are feasible isn't the point, rather that we are creative people and there are many ways we could address our carbon debt. And what if we do the right thing but others do not? This is all the more reason that we need to get busy so that we can lead by example. and that will allow us to share whatever new technologies we develop as a consequence. This is a time for cooperation, not competition. Our collective futures will permit nothing less. Finally, there are some who attempt to apply deadlines to climate change, and even some who think it's too late. It's not. This is not what the science is telling us. And while some of the consequences of climate change are likely unavoidable, it will be much worse if we don't start acting more proactively now. Our nation has many challenges beyond climate change, but none of them will matter if we don't get this one right. Make no mistake, this is a call to action like no other.